Was the Trump shooting a deep state inside job, asks our poll this evening. That's up there with is the Pope a Catholic and do bears defecate in the woods? It's such an obvious thing that either the U.S. Secret Service, at least in Pennsylvania, are the Keystone Cops. They couldn't shoot the inside of a barn door. The men and women of the presidential detail made such a hash of protecting Donald Trump that you have to conclude they were in on the crime. The only alternative would be that they'd been appointed to their positions in a box-ticking exercise, were not up to the job, shouldn't have been placed in charge of anything, not a whelk stall, not a student union cafe. And can that really be true? If it is, it will cheer America's enemies all over the world. Because if that's what the inner core, the blue chip of the American Secret Service really is like, then Charlie Chaplin could have written the script. But much more likely is that young Mr. Crooks was not the gunman. At least not the gunman that was supposed to hit the head of the former and soon-to-be current President of the United States. There must have been another shooter. Crooks was just the patsy, the Lee Harvey Oswald of this inside job. His head was helpfully blown apart, but only after he'd fired off 5 shots, it turns out. It turns out that there were Secret Servicemen at that building, but they were all inside the building. Just exactly how they were to protect the president from inside the building is yet to be explained, but it has been explained by the head of the Secret Service, a young woman whose name escapes me, that they hadn't a sniper on top of the roof because the roof had a slope on it, and she was afraid that the Secret Service men employed would fall off it. I'm not making any of this up. But there's now very real reason to believe that behind or on top of that water tower was the real gunman who came so very close to changing the course of American and indeed world history, that the mere strand of a blonde wig could possibly be all that turned the history of the mightiest country on earth, the history of the world conflicts in which we are in, is something that should not easily be brushed over. This is a major league scandal. And if Trump has any sense at all, and I know that it sometimes looks like he doesn't, he must keep the pressure up on this administration, not just for the incessant incitement that they have maintained over the last years, painting Trump as Hitler, as Stalin, as a Russian agent, which inevitably, ineluctably led to someone somewhere being prepared to go down in history as the young man that rid America of this turbulent priest. But incessant pressure on the Secret Service failure. I know, given he's in their hands until November, although I've always said that that is unwise, more unwise still for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to want anything to do with the FBI, anything to do with the CIA, anything to do with the Secret Service details, who almost certainly killed both his father and his uncle. I know that Trump is in a difficult position, but if I were him, I'd definitely have a shadow security team, a private shadow security team with me at all times from now until November. Because it's quite evident that the sheer desperation of the Democratic Party leaders and the Democrat establishment in the fancy newspapers and in the fading broadcasting companies, their desperation to stop Trump cannot just be about his syntax, his pussy grabbing, his bringing down the standards of the office, standards set by dozens of American presidents before him. It cannot be that. It must be something more serious. And my guess is that the answer lies in Ukraine. And my guess is that Trump knows that very well. Trump is going to strip bare the rampant, deep, multi-billion-dollar corruption of the American administration in Ukraine. All these 60 billion price tags that Zelensky takes away with him every time he visits the United States are about more, much more, than just providing half-tracks for the poor, bloody infantry of the Ukrainian armed forces. They are about corruption on a scale the likes of which we have never seen before, ever, in all human history. This is the biggest scandal case that hopefully will ever exist in human history. And Trump is zeroing in on it. When he says that he's going to stop the war between November and January, you better believe him, because there is nothing that Trump is more determined to do than stop the Ukrainian war, unseat the little Napoleon, Zelensky, and then open the books. And when he opens the books, all the way back to Burisma, the oil company that was paying Hunter Biden $80,000 a month for a no-show job, was just the tip of the iceberg. And that many other sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, mistresses, and whatever the male equivalent of mistresses is, were all on the payroll in Ukraine. They were all looting the Ukraine. But since the war began, the scale of American subvention to Ukraine can only smell like a huge money laundering operation. And it's going to bring a lot of people down. In corporate America, in the military-industrial complex, of course, in the soon-to-be fleeing Ukrainian regime, but it will destroy the Democratic Party as we know it. I mean, end it. Because the noses that were in the trough are the high and mighty of the Democratic Party, and Trump is going for it all. If you don't believe me, look at who he's picked as his vice presidential running mate. JD Vance is many things, some of them honorable, some of them admirable, others deplorable. But let me just fasten on one of them for the moment. JD Vance is even more hostile to the corruption between America and Ukraine than Donald Trump is. If Donald Trump showed any signs of faltering in the unmasking of this grand larceny of the American purse, JD Vance is determined to steady his hand. Vance has opposed all of the subventions going to Ukraine. He has opposed the Ukraine war right from the beginning. He does not want or intend to see America enter World War III against Russia. The orange cowboy has picked the king of the hillbillies. His hillbilly elegy is a joy to read. It is a Rust Belt spectacular. And Vance is going to sweep the Rust Belt for the Trump-Vance ticket by a landslide. They will win Ohio, Pennsylvania. They will win Wisconsin. They will win Michigan. And that's the end of the presidential election, folks, whatever happens elsewhere. So Vance is against World War III, against Russia. Against China, he's not so sure, although he did sagely make the point today at the Republican convention, that China's rise is fueled not by military bases, not by getting into war after war, but by development, by helping the countries that it is now in the closest possible alliance with through the Belt and Road Initiative. So at least, at last, a man who can see straight, if not shoot straight. The dangerous thing about Vance ties back to the issue of the assassination attempt. Vance may not want war with Russia. He may not even be sure about wanting war with China, but he sure wants war with Iran. Over and over and over again, Vance has stated that there's no point in little bombing runs, there's no point in punching Iran unless you punch it very hard indeed. And given that Vance, like Trump, is in the pocket of the Israel lobby in the United States to an extraordinary depth, you can be sure that Netanyahu will be working up the case for punching Iran hard in the first days of a Trump-Vance administration. So breathe a sigh of relief. We're not going to World War III unless it starts under Biden. And who's going to march to war under Joe Biden? Increasingly unhinged, demented. Unless it starts before November, we're not going to World War III in Ukraine, but we might very well be going to it in the Persian Gulf. And if that doesn't frighten you, you haven't been paying attention. The King's speech was today. There was no stammering, only stammering. And there was much bonhomie between the British front benches, Labour and Conservative, as they marched off to see the King. And what a foolish sight it all looked. A man in a £5 million crown, and his wife's crown worth only a little less, who travelled to the venue of the British Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, in a solid gold coach, costing millions. It was the King's speech today. He's waited a long time to do a King's speech, and it may be, God forbid, his last King's speech. But there was no question of stuttering or stammering involved, because this King's speech could as easily have been given in the hand of Rishi Sunak as it was in the hand of Keir Starmer. It was a blancmange of nothingness, a nothing burger for American viewers. It will do nothing to halt the slide to war in the world. It will do nothing to stop the burning of £12,000 per minute on weapons and war in Britain, whilst our public realm crumbles all around us, whilst our vital national assets, like the National Health Service, suffer and die until they cry out in pain for privatization and the American way. The truth is, this King's speech will do nothing for the mass poverty that exists in our country. 4 million children in Britain went to school today hungry with no breakfast. Millions of our people in the cold winter to come, in this global boiling. It's July and I've got all my heating on. I've got my heater on in the car. There's plenty of greenery and quackery and wokery in the King's speech, but no answers to the real problems suffered by people that in the wintertime have to choose between heating and eating. There was no hope or pretense of any lifting of the poverty pay earned by millions of people in Britain, which leads to a situation where the record number of food banks are attended by a record number of people in work. That's right. They're at work being paid, but being paid so little that they have to get their food from charity food banks. That's right. £12,000 a minute on weapons and war. Nothing on the minimum wage. Nothing on lifting the demographically insane cap on child benefits for families with more than 2 children. Insane. In a country that claims it doesn't want mass immigration, we're making it more and more difficult for our own people to have more children. We're punishing a third child for being born. It gets no child benefit under Labour and under Conservative. There will be no cap on bankers' bonuses. in the King's speech, just a cap on families with more than 2 children. Do the maths. The King's speech has no answer to Britain's lost role in the world, drifting around the world like the Mare Celeste, with nobody apparently on board, no course charted, no direction home. In fact, home is the last direction that we appear to be going. David Lammy, the Idi Amin of British politics, take a look at him, you'll know what I mean, has to be the most vulgar, clumsy, yet vainglorious oaf ever to hold the title of Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. The mega expense claiming, multiple job enjoying fool chose as his first official trip abroad to go to Israel, the country that has given him hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations, and to shake the bloodied hand of Netanyahu and to tell him that this British government, like the last one, will stop the International Criminal Court from issuing an arrest warrant that would see his overseas travel radically diminished. He shook the hands of President Herzog, a hand last seen signing his autograph on rockets and shells that were about to rain down on the hundreds of thousands now dead Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands dead, according to the Lancet, from top experts. 186,000 dead. 8% of the Gaza population dead. Factor in the hundreds of thousands more who've been mutilated and maimed on a ratio of presumably 3 to 1. We are talking getting towards a half of all the people in Gaza who've been murdered or maimed, wounded, left homeless, living in tents in the baking midsummer heat in Gaza, with no power, no water, no food, no medicine, no functioning hospitals. And Lammy was there with his big, stupid grin to place the imprimatur of Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the great crime of the 21st century. It's all coming up in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes or so. So fasten your seatbelt and stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.